Did Spider-Man fans, or the communities around the character who care about the character, help ruin this character? Now, this is, I think, an important question, and it might not be the angle you think I'm tackling it from, because in the past I did talk about Spider-Man fans and how awful and toxic some of them are. Now, if you think I'm talking about you, that might be a reflective moment, but I'm probably not. I did have some people, even like a big Spider-Man content creator, message me getting all mad about it. But I'm not talking about it from that angle, even though there is an angle there to cover. Some people Uncle Ben would be embarrassed of. But I do think that in general, Spider-Man has been enabled to be popular for too long at too big of a scale. Now, you might wonder what I mean by that. You might say, well, what's wrong with a character being popular? Well, we can look no further than a character like Batman over on the DC Comics side of the big two publishers, where there are still good stories, but because the character is so popular, it does mean that they get to shine and they get a billion ongoing titles or miniseries while other characters get ignored. As long as stories stay good, you could argue that as a fan of that character, or maybe as a fan of only that character, maybe you don't care about others in that universe, it doesn't matter. The problem with Spider-Man, though, is you can't even tackle the character from that angle of it not mattering that he's been kept too popular, because the stories suck. Most of them are awful, and it is genuinely time to stop enabling Marvel Comics and stop buying Spider-Man comics just because he's on the cover. Now, there are definitely exceptions to this rule. Things like the current Ultimate Spider-Man run by Jonathan Hickman are fantastic. A fantastic look at the character, at what responsibility and adulthood actually mean. A version of the character that is unafraid to actually talk about family, that isn't just terrified of the idea of commitment, that isn't constantly getting backstabbed in order to further a soap opera drama. But I want to talk about this for a few minutes today, because even statements from high up executives at Marvel, like editors, all these people, they point to I would say a dynamic that's been created and an atmosphere that has been cultivated where Spider-Man comics can be just awful. They can just be bottom of the barrel in terms of quality, and they will still sell. And that is not the fault of editorial. That is not the fault of any writer. Should they strive to be better? Yes, absolutely, but they don't have to. And it's because a lot of people are constantly buying in, almost in a sick fascination of if this train wreck will ever find a way to right itself. And I don't think that's a good idea. So I do have a question of the day for you in general, which is, do you think that there is merit to this idea? That constant purchasing of Spider-Man, that constant enabling of these titles to be bad by buying them anyway, is also contributing to the current quality of Spider-Man and Spider-Man adjacent books? I'm interested in your thoughts down below. Basically, do you think that what I'm saying has merit? And you're obviously more than allowed to disagree with me. I would just like to know why. Now, when it comes down to it, I do think there have been authors tied up into this mess and treated very poorly because of it who don't deserve it. At the end of the day, do I think that a author who writes a bad story or who writes a story I disagree with deserves to be harassed, sent death threats, attacked at a convention, berated? No, not really. I think their work should be critiqued. I think that they should not be above being critiqued, and they shouldn't just block everyone on Twitter or wherever who doesn't like their work. But I don't think that they should be treated as any less of a person. Someone I can actually think of in this situation who I think was treated very poorly was Dan Slott, for example. Now, there's a lot of people who have various reasons they don't like Dan Slott or his work. Maybe they feel like he said something mean on Twitter. Maybe they feel like he was rude to them when they criticized his work, whatever. In general, though, when you look back at the way that he was treated for doing Superior Spider-Man, I actually think that the storyline was an interesting divergence for the character. And it was actually a very interesting look into another character. It was treated as almost a little bit of a limited series. It went on for so long, and it ended. But then, of course, like all things, it got brought back multiple times. But in general, he was someone at the time who was being treated very, very poorly over how he wrote this book. Now, as someone who likes that book, I first think that's too bad, and secondly, even if I didn't, I don't think that's okay. And I wanted to use him as an example because I know that some of his work is considered controversial, but at the same time, you look back at statements that he made, he was also one of the people actually arguing for things like renew your vows, where there was an alternate reality where Spider-Man and Mary Jane were actually together and had a family, kind of like almost a prototype for what we now see in the current Ultimate Spider-Man universe, in a lot of ways. Different universe, but some similar ideas. And so this was someone who was behind the scenes still wanting, I would argue, what he believed was the best for the character. My problem, though, is that I feel like there are a lot of authors right now who are not actually working for what the best of the character is. I've talked about my disagreements with the way an author like Zeb Wells handled Spider-Man in the past. Now, I don't want to make any accusations here, but a lot of people have pointed out, the timing of this man's divorce and all these different things, and how Peter was written in his stories as kind of having to take a backseat to another man. And while I would argue it is okay to bring your own life into the stories you write if it serves the character, my problem is that this would be an example of where I think it didn't serve the character, where the quality, just in general, of that book was very low. Spider-Man was acting very much out of character at many points, but does Zeb Wells deserve death threats? No. I want to make that distinction very clearly here when we talk about this kind of stuff, because I think that the work itself should be critiqued, and sometimes even the creator themselves should be critiqued, even sometimes as a person. But that doesn't mean you go after them, right, in some kind of wish upon their life or anything like that. I would never want that. And I think that fans, though, they have done that, while others have continued to buy it. So you have like these two camps that are the loudest. One camp is the loudest because they're constantly purchasing. And even Tom Brevoort, who's high up at Marvel Comics, pointed out, whether he's lying or not, it's up to you, but pointed out that Ultimate Spider-Man was outselling Amazing Spider-Man, but not by very much. So you had all of these loud people who wanted Peter back together with Mary Jane. You had all of these people who had their ideas of what Spider-Man should be. Many of those fans, I truly think, had better ideas than the authors working on Spider-Man. And yet at the same time, those people, many of that subsection were so loud and violent with like end your existence type statements to some of these authors. I mean, I've seen authors have to cancel appearances at conventions or get security because of this, when at the end of the day, it's a comic book. But on the other hand, it's more than a comic book. These are stories that really connect with people. Growing up, when I was very young, I didn't have very many friends, but one friend I always had was Spider-Man. And it sounds pathetic, I'm sure, to adults, but I would carry around my notebooks and I'd draw pictures of Spider-Man. I would carry around a folder of Spider-Man comics when I went somewhere and I was uncomfortable, and I would read those things. If you can't tell, I've become much more able to express myself on the autism spectrum, but like it was always there, right? Like I was the weird kid who had a folder of Spider-Man comics that I would read at all times. And sometimes even on the playground, like when I felt like people didn't want to be around me, I'd read a comic. And so those characters, I think when these authors go into them and they do drag them down, or they do bastardize what that character means, I think they don't understand what that means to some people. Now, unfortunately, some people will take that as an excuse to be the worst type of person. They will send threats, they will lash out, they will, do all these things. And so then you have that group that's very loud. And then I would argue you also have authors writing almost, I would say to spite that group that they think are violent little losers or angry people. And they view it as like, well, this is my work, I can do whatever I want. To some extent, though, those angry people have a point that the character matters so much, but they're dealing with it in the wrong way, which I would argue emboldens bad writing. On the other hand, you have this group that constantly buys. You know, where you can have Tom Brevoort out here saying things like, well, the numbers aren't that much different. Because people are buying because they care about the character. But they don't realize in a way that's hurting the character as well. Because when you buy bad stories, you constantly enable bad books, just like bad video games or bad movies. If I make the world's worst movie, and we make $5 billion off of it, guess what we're gonna do? We're gonna make a sequel, because we know that we can milk you for your money, whether it's bad or not. That's the business side of things. And I truly think that a lot of the people buying some of these things, whether it's for a good reason or not, like I love the character, which is a fine reason, if you are buying this comic and you are hating it, you know, it's time to stop. It's time to take a break, because just like those loud, violent losers, you know, who are threatening people, send a really strong message to authors, the people who are constantly silently buying, or even buying and bitching about it, what makes a louder statement is the money. At the end of the day, do I think that all of these things should be run purely as a business? No, but I'm a realist. I understand that they often are. What it should be is about the art. What it should be is about telling good stories. If we have a good limited story, you know, for a random character, that's great. You know, we should tell that, whether that will sell boatloads or not, as long as it will enhance our universe. That's a good thing. But I know that between people's spite writing and between the fact that editorial can constantly point back to numbers that are not diminishing, it is truly also the fault, I believe, not just of the people who should be doing better out of respect of her art, the creators, but also the fault of people who are enabling that bad behavior. And I think people can see this in so many different examples. They can see when a parent enables bad behavior in a child. They can see when, you know, things like that happen, but they can't see when they're enabling a bad product, you know, by constantly supporting it. There is a point at which supporting something or someone when they have lost themselves is not actually supporting them, it is hurting them. And I truly think that the undying support that Spider-Man has, regardless of the quality, same with video games where people can be unwilling to criticize aspects of them, it's bad for that creation and it's bad for that character. So, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I know some people have very contentious opinions on it, and you know what? At the end of the day, you are allowed to spend your money on whatever you want. I'm not going to show up at your house and prevent you from buying something, but I truly do think that there is a point at which support is no longer making something better. It is enabling it to be bad. And that's kind of where I want to leave it. So if you enjoyed the video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, I appreciate that very much. All the normal ways to support my channel are going to be in the description down below, along with my other channels like Degenerate Plays, where we've been playing through games. We've actually played through some Spider-Man games, and we will be playing through more in the future. We also have JayRPG, where I cover role-playing games, and Magical Jill, where we talk more about anime, manga, and stuff like that. And finally, as well, we do have our own store, CosmoFunny.shop. Something we actually pride ourselves on is trying to always make our pieces better, regardless of how much or how little we earn there. What we do is we take comics, manga, magazines, and other books that are damaged, and we take the paper from that, and we transform it into a new medium of coasters, keychains, trays, and more made out of resin. And, you know, we recycle that paper, and we keep it out of landfills. So I hope you'll check that out. Discount code DJAY123 will get you 10% off your first purchase there, and we are also going back into doing some resin jewelry as well. So maybe you have someone in your life who has a birthday or event coming up and maybe they're not a comic book fan. There is something there, I think, for everyone as well. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shway.